Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to go through this exemplar of the behavior management plan, sort of talk about the components that we might want to include in a behavior management plan and the rationale for some of those components. And I think it's really important to say right up front that there's nothing that's magical about this particular template. There's no particular form that a behavior management plan necessarily has to take. There are some key elements that should be included in it, but as long as those elements are included and the plan is presented in a way that's clear and it's easy to understand, you can pretty much use any format. Typically, you want to be consistent if you're creating multiple plans, or if you have staff that are going to be looking at multiple plans. If they're set up in a consistent way, it's going to be easier for those staff to be able to find the information they need. But within that, you're certainly welcome to use this template, both for this assignment and for your work as ongoing behavior analysts. But you don't need to, as long as the information contained here is included. So in this behavior management plan exemplar, the name of the client, the date, who developed the plan. And then when we get into background and demographics, there are a couple of key things that are talked about here. And again, these are by no means, it's not an exhaustive list, but here are some key things that are important for us to think about. The first one is the learner communication skills or style. And this is going to be really important because as we think about replacement behaviors, it's going to be important to know how the person that we're working with currently communicates. And what's that skill set like? Are they vocal verbal communicators? Do they use sign or picture exchange or some kind of a technological device to communicate? And how good are they at doing it? Do we need to work on actually improving their communication skills for them to have a functional alternative? So a little bit about communication skills and style, strengths, which is going to be important as we think about, what someone's able to do well right now, so we can use that in a constructional approach for skill building. Likes and dislikes, which is going to be important as we think about what potential reinforcers might be. Also, as we think about what some antecedents might be. Are there things that the learner dislikes that if they're put in that situation might be problematic or might lead to a higher likelihood of problem behavior? Then we get into the actual behavior of concern, just listing it. In this case, we've got physical aggression, and then an operational definition of what that behavior of concern is, right? So that we want to make sure that it's objective, it's observable. If two people observe someone engaging in the behavior, they both can agree whether it happened or it didn't happen. And that can include components of both a function-based definition. So here, any behavior that causes physical pain to others or that would cause physical pain if not blocked or deflected. But then also, it's not a bad idea to include some topographical information about what it currently looks like. So by including the function-based piece, we have the leeway that if the behavior shifts in form, we can still capture that definition. But it's worth alerting the reader to what it typically looks like for this learner. And then once we have the behavior of concern and its operational definition, what's our hypothesized function of that behavior of concern? Why do we think the person engages in that problem behavior? And that's going to be really important because it's going to feed into our next piece, which is what our functional replacement behavior is. And here we're looking for something that's going to be functionally equivalent to the problem behavior. So here we think that John's physical aggression is maintained by access to tangibles. So a functional replacement behavior would be adaptive item requests. We're looking for a different way for John to make it known that he wants access to tangibles, so that we can give him those tangibles when he asks for them. Obviously, if we thought John's behavior was maintained by escape or maintained by attention, we would have a different replacement behavior that speaks to his ability to get those needs met. And then we may have other behaviors to increase as well. In this case, I included coping skills use because there are going to be some times for John, even when he asks for what he wants appropriately, it may just not be possible to give it to him. And when those situations arise, it's important in this case that we teach him other ways to sort of be able to deal with that situation, that he's not able to get access to what he wants without resorting to physical aggression. And again, for both of those, we're going to operationally define those as much as we can. Then we're going to want to have baseline data for both behaviors to increase and behaviors to decrease, right? It makes sense that we'd have the behaviors to decrease. You want to see how often the problem behavior is happening right now, because that's the only way we know whether our interventions are improving it. A line graph that includes baseline data on behaviors to decrease, but also our behaviors to increase if we have it. So here we've got John does engage in some adaptive item requests, doesn't engage in any coping skills used right now because we're specifically targeting for John the use of a stress ball, and he hasn't had access to that. So if the baseline data are 0, it's okay just to state that the baseline data are 0. But if we have more meaningful data to report, if it's happening to some degree, behaviors to decrease and increase, our best bet is to illustrate that with a line graph. Then our objectives of our behavior management plan, which should map on to our baseline data, and those objectives should include decreasing our behavior to decrease, but also increasing our behaviors to increase. We want to make sure that our method of taking data maps onto our baseline data, as well as what our data collection tool is going to be. In this case, we're looking at increasing or decreasing the percent of hour-long intervals using a partial interval recording method, okay? So that's great if that's going to map onto our data collection system, which we'll see later on. In this case, it does. We want to be careful that we don't put in objectives that aren't going to map onto our ability to take data and be able to report on those objectives. So after our objectives, moving into behaviors to increase and interventions, and here we're going to list what those behaviors are. We've talked about them already. For John, it's adaptive item requests and coping skills use, but then we're going to specifically really list out all the things that we're going to do to help increase those behaviors, which can include lots of different things. In some cases, it can be the actual training. How are we going to go about teaching our learner how to engage in these responses, and then reinforcing our learner when they do engage in those responses? In some cases, that reinforcement could be non-specific things. It could be praise, it could be tokens, it could be tangibles, right? In other cases, it might be something that's functionally equivalent, and especially when we talk about adaptive communication, differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior is really what we're getting at here. It's going to be important that we reinforce that when it occurs by providing that functional, what the function of that behavior was. In this case, physical aggression is maintained by access to tangibles. So when he adaptively requests something, as much as we can, we're going to want to give it to him. So just a little bit about how we're going to go about teaching those skills. The next section is antecedent management. Where we're going to get into what are those things that we know make it more likely that our learner is going to engage in problem behavior. Here we talked about this with learner likes and dislikes. We know that John struggles with being told no. We know that he struggles with being in crowded or noisy environments. So just some information, as well as he struggles with having to share preferred things. So a little bit of information about, number one, how can we avoid having him in those situations where it's likely to be problematic? But then second, if we have to put him in those situations, because we sometimes have to, right? It's not always possible to, I call it wrapping someone in bubble wrap, right? It's not always possible to remove anything that's remotely aversive from someone's environment. Sometimes we have to be exposed to those things. So what are we going to do when that happens to make sure that that we're providing support and minimizing the likelihood of problem behavior? And then finally, we can also think about, that sometimes we intentionally want to expose our learner to potentially aversive situations, potential situations that might serve as antecedents, but that we want to do that in a really planful way, in a way that's designed to build skills and build tolerance, which takes a lot of planning and takes a lot of support to be able to successfully shepherd our learners through those situations. So that's our antecedent management section. And then we get into our behaviors to decrease in interventions, which our behaviors to decrease is specifically what's that problem behavior that we're looking to decrease, and then how are we going to decrease it? And this may include a couple of things. It may include a reductive procedure that's non-punishment or non-extinction based, right? Things like using a DRO, which is what we did in this case, which is one of those methods of decreasing behavior through non-punishment means. It's really more of an intervention that we're going to put in place proactively, right? But it's also going to include when we do see physical aggression, what do we do about it? right? How are we going to respond to, in this case, to John's physical aggression in a way that obviously keeps everybody safe, but also does not accidentally provide reinforcement for the problem behavior that was engaged in. And then following that, just a little caveat that's always important, that if that problem behavior escalates to the point that there's really a serious concern for safety, we may need to put aside our thoughts about long-term learning and reinforcement and just make sure we're keeping everybody safe. And that sort of feeds into our crisis intervention plan. Just a little bit about, okay, what happens if things have gone to a place that we didn't expect? We're getting problem behavior. We're worried someone's going to get really hurt. What do we do about it to keep everybody safe? And in that case, what do we do? But also then how do we follow up? Because if that situation has happened, that was unexpected, but we ought to be able to learn from it and make a game plan moving forward if we see it again. Then finally, just a little piece about data collection and review, which is basically saying how we're going to take data, how often we're going to take it, and how often we're going to review those data to determine if we need to make changes to our plan. And then the actual data collection sheet, which does not need to look this way. This is, again, if we remember our objectives here, were to either increase or decrease the percent of hour-long intervals using a partial interval recording method. So our data collection system is set up that way with physical aggression, adaptive item requests, and coping skills use with our operational definitions, and then instructions for how to fill out the sheet. For each hour, if he engages in any of these behaviors, we circle them. If he doesn't, we don't. If he doesn't engage in any of these behaviors for the entire hour, we put an X through the box. And if we didn't take data, we just leave it blank, right? So this is important so we can tease out the difference between, wow, that hour was completely unmarred. There were no instances of any of these behaviors versus, no, I just didn't take data on that day, right? So that's important too. So all of those components, and again, this is the exemplar, and there's a template you can use if you choose to, but these are the components that I'm looking to see in your behavior management plan. Thanks a lot.